training frequency, what the ideal training frequency is. First up, for those that don't know, better define what training frequency is. So, Brad Schoenfeld, one of the top researchers on muscle gain and hypertrophy in the world, says, while traditionally the term frequency has been associated with how many days a week you work out, a potentially more important variable is the number of times a given muscle group is trained per week. So, first up, you can think of training frequency as how often do you train per week. So, if you train 4 days a week, training frequency of four. Now, if you train upper, lower, so the upper body on day one, lower body day two, and then repeat that, the training frequency per muscle group is 2 because they get trained twice per week. So, as Brad Schoenfeld said, the real variable we're looking at with frequency is how often is a particular muscle group getting trained when we're looking at hypertrophy. So, if we then think what's optimal for hypertrophy in general, most of the research seems to indicate roughly 2 times a week. 2 being better than 1. There's not enough studies really to say it's 3 better than 2, but the weight of evidence seems to indicate that certainly you're better off training a muscle twice per week than you are just once per week. Now, getting into some more specifics on frequency, because those are some broad overview guidelines. What's most useful to you, getting you growing, you've got to take some various factors into consideration to optimise it for you. So one of those is training frequency should be based on your experience. This is actually a little bit of a controversial subject because some people say that as you train more and your experience increases over the years, you should train more frequently, and others take the opposite view. So I'll just sort of go through those points quickly and then give you my take on it. Now, one of the reasons that people say as you are more advanced you should train more frequently is because after you train, muscle protein synthesis, MPS, which is essentially the process of building new muscle tissue, is elevated. But as you become more and more experienced, that period of time that it's elevated is shorter and shorter. So that kind of anabolic window reduces in time. And so the point is made that, well, on that basis, you need to keep stimulating this frequently, and therefore you should train with a greater frequency the more advanced you get. However, whilst that's nice from a theoretical standpoint, it has some practical issues, and it might not be possible for really advanced guys. Because as you get more experienced and therefore stronger, the frequency with which you can overload a muscle might well actually drop. Think about it this way, as you're bigger and stronger, you can cause more disruption to the body, disrupt homeostasis more, and this requires more time to recover. You've produced a bigger stimulus, or provided a bigger stimulus, and so it takes longer to recover from that stimulus. And so because recovery is slower, you may not be able to train a muscle quite so frequently. Also, just from a practical standpoint, if you are a really, really strong guy, it's going to take you longer to warm up for. It takes you longer to warm up for a set of 200 kilo squats than it does a set of 60 kilo squats. So as you become more advanced, you need to warm up for longer. Now, if you've got to train a muscle frequently, there's going to be a lot of time spent warming up, because one of the ways that the high frequency crowd suggest you train is with essentially a whole body routine. That means you've got to warm up for a set of squats to train your legs. You've also got to warm up your chest for bench, for example, and if you're training your back with pull-ups, you've got to do warm-up sets for that. Now, if you're using more of even an upper-lower or a split routine, once you've done that first warm-up for the first exercise, say you're training legs, you warmed up for squats, well, the quads are pretty warm when you go today, do leg presses or hack squats, split squats, leg extensions, whatever it may be. So there's less wasted time warming up for those. Training with a real high frequency, if you're really advanced, means you might end up, warming up for the best part of an hour during the session and not, and then you've got an hour's worth of training to do on top. Most people haven't got two plus hours available to train each day. So just from a practical standpoint, it may not work. So I suppose there's a trade-off between potentially what's optimal and what's practical. So yeah, sure, there's some arguments for training frequently might get you slightly better results, but if you just can't fit that in, then it's pointless, because unless you've got a couple of hours a day to train every day, it's not happening. So with those logistical and practical issues, I tend to take the reverse approach and think that frequency per muscle group will actually gradually decline through your training career. So it might end up that in the first couple of years you're training, you can do whole body routines. Probably 3 days a week will be enough to get you good results at first. Then probably to keep getting sufficient training volume and keep progressing, you might want to go to 4 days a week. But you can still recover as a beginner 4 days a week, whole body. So frequency might peak at 4 times a week. Now after a couple of years, you're probably going to struggle to do that. You're going to need to provide a lot of volume per muscle group to get a stimulus, and you need to split that up a little bit. So then that's when your upper lower routine comes in. Now you might be able to up your overall training frequency to say from 4 days a week to 6 days a week, but you do upper lower and train each muscle 3 days a week. So whilst your training frequency overall has increased from 4 to 6, the training frequency per muscle group has actually dropped from 4 to 3. Now, obviously, that assumes you're able to do 6 days a week, but let's assume you are. And for several years, maybe even up to from years 2 to 5 in your training career, you should be able to do that, get good results. Once you go beyond that point, 5+ years of training, you've got made a lot of progress. You're much bigger and stronger. You probably need some variety other than just upper lower. A really popular one is push-pull legs. And other people have start gravitating towards various split routines at this point, but the push-pull leg ones is a really good one. So with that, you may keep training frequency overall the same, 6 times a week, but the per muscle group frequency is dropped down to 2 a week because you do 2 pushing sessions, 2 pulling sessions, and 2 leg sessions a week. That will probably last you a good chunk of your career. You'll get great results doing that. Maybe once you get past the 8, 9, 10 year mark, it may not be possible to do 2 really big sessions per week for push, pull and legs. Then you might have to start focusing slightly differently. So for example, you could keep the same split and the same frequency, but on back day you might have a back width day and a back thickness day, where the emphasis is very much on the width of the back on day 1, training the lats, and then on the second back day you're training the thickness, so your rhomboids, in the mid back. So that's one way we could do that. So you could do that with legs as well. You might have a day that's focused on quads, but you just do a little bit of hamstring work, and another day where you do focus on hamstrings and a little bit of quad work. Your push session might be a vertical push day where you focus on sort of the upper portion of the chest, the clavicular head of the chest, and your shoulders, overhead pressing. And on the other day, it's more flat bench and focusing on the sternal portion of the pec, so the lower chest. Now, assuming you've done all that and you pass that and approaching the 13, 14, 15 year mark, you're doing great. You probably look awesome, but you may well not be able to keep this training frequency up. You might have to kind of do like one heavy session, one light session, or like almost like a recovery session, so like a feeder session. So you might have one hard heavy session per muscle group, and then a second session which is much lighter, more pump type work, get a bit of blood flow, but really it promotes recovery from that hard first session to allow you to hit it again later. So this is where your pro bodybuilder might be doing like a bro type split, doing this, but those guys have earned the right to do this because they've been training 15+ years, whatever. So really this is maybe a frequency of 1.5, you could call it. You should do one hard session and a half session later in the week. So that's how your training experience affects frequency, or can be a factor and something to consider. Another thing you've got to think about is your goal. Now, if your goal is strength, your frequency might be slightly different. So if your goal is just purely size, if you want to get massive and hypertrophy is your goal, you may do it a little bit different. Because high frequency has been shown to have some great potential for really for strength gains, even for really advanced lifters. There's the Norwegian study came out showing their powerlifters did fantastically when they train with really high frequency. However, if you want hypertrophy, you need to push really high volumes to overload the body and force it to grow. And as you become more advanced, you may need to do you're going to need to do more and more volume. And it might be easier logistically and from a practical standpoint to smash the muscle group once, twice a week, and then give it several days to recover before doing it again. Because to overload the muscle, you have to really provide a big stimulus, and that takes quite a lot of sets and reps and maybe even various exercises to achieve. and you may not be able to do that in just shorter sessions, training it with a high frequency. Like that per session overload might not be really significant enough to force adaptation. So those are two key variables: your experience and your goals. Then finally, the next thing to consider is the muscle individual differences, or differences between certain muscle groups. Frequency is generally thought of in like really general guidelines, like even as I've discussed it here, we're sort of categorising all muscles as equal, and you keep in fairly even frequency between muscle groups, but that doesn't really consider the differences between them, particularly their different SRA timeframes or curves. So the stimulus, recovery, adaptation. So you provide a stimulus, then that sort of causes fatigue. The body recovers back to baseline and hopefully adapts a bit above that before tailing off, and then you do the next session. So, for example, like a tough quad session annihilates anyone, takes a long time to recover. That you cause huge disruption to the muscle, to the body as a whole, and it's way more fatiguing than doing like a lateral delt session or bicep session, right? Like just logically, you could do biceps more frequently. You can do a really tough leg session. So what I'd suggest you really look to do is a variable recovery training system. It's probably an optimal approach. So, for example, muscles like biceps, rear and lateral delts, your calves, they can probably be trained 4 days a week. Things like triceps and chest, maybe and the anterior delt, front of the shoulder, 3 times a week, and then your quads, your hamstrings, and your back twice a week. So that would be my suggestion to really optimise it. Is work your way. Whole body's great to start off with, then probably upper lower. You can go push pull for a while, and then maybe really start to think about manipulating the frequency based on the individual muscle, how quickly that recovers, and the optimal frequency for that muscle, rather than just thinking as everything's equal, which is ridiculous, really. Anyway, so I hope that gives you some insight into training frequency for size, how you can manipulate things. Got any other questions? Feel free to drop me a note. I'll be happy to help out. Cheers, guys. Catch you next time.